that Mr. Garby Otchere Darko was alive last week, and since then he's written a widely circulated epistle which completely distorts what went on Alhaji last week. Mr. Garby Otchere Darko somehow is able to conjure statements and so on, and to put them out as statements which were made by me. I think it's most unfortunate. Everybody has a right to express themselves as freely as possible, but nobody has a right to conjure, statements and to attribute them to anybody. Mr. Garby Otchere Darko alleges in his epistle that I claimed that the security forces voted for the National Democratic Congress. And his attempt to challenge what I had said claims that the special voting, the results of the special voting, if you look at the results of the special voting, the New Patriotic Party won. I did not make any reference to special voting in the statements that I made last week. I asked a very simple question about who won in the barracks of the security forces. And I mentioned Burma Camp, I mentioned Michel Camp, and a few others. How this somehow strangely translates into special voting, only Mr. Garby Otchere Darko can explain. And in fact, I'm wondering why he did that. What was he trying to achieve? In any case, how did he get to know how the special voting went when the special voting is not counted alone? So what mischief was he trying to create? What was the purpose? This running around in a confused state and so on, he can do it in his party. You understand? He's free to do it in the New Patriotic Party, where people think that he's some kind of a semi-god and so on. But he cannot do it in this public space. You understand? He cannot do it in this public space. In any case, what was I saying? All I was saying last week was simply that the security forces are professional and that we should respect them. I was saying that they will rise up to defend the integrity of the establishment. And I was asking the very simple question. Many people were arrested who were posing as either soldiers or policemen and so on. And I asked a very simple question. Who arrested them? If they are arrested by soldiers and policemen, it's the clearest indication that our soldiers and policemen do not want to be part of this crazy attempt, to foster militias on us and so on. And he wrote epistles, circulated it all over the place and so on. I was wondering, what's wrong with Garby Otchere Darko? What is taking hold of him and so on? But let's put that aside. I mean, he was completely wrong, because in the course of the week, I've seen a video of a radio presenter actually providing figures of how the voting went in the different barracks. And Mr. Garby Otchere Darko should be really embarrassed by what he did. Totally needless exercise. And so I think I would leave it at that. Now this morning, some of our viewers have asked that they should be helped to avoid contempt of court. I think they do so because of what happened with the last petition, which was presented to the Supreme Court by the New Patriotic Party and His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, the President. We at Pan-African Television have decided that in the course of the proceedings in the Supreme Court, we're going to set up a special panel of experts, lawyers, to assist our viewers to understand what is going on in the Supreme Court. Because we suspect that a lot of the proceedings will be in very dense legal language and so on. So we're going to set up a panel of experts, of lawyers, to help our viewers to understand, what is going on in the Supreme Court, to explain the processes and so on. And we're going to do that. I'm not a lawyer. I just happen to be a journalist. And you cannot be a journalist, trained professional journalist, if you do not understand the laws of contempt. It's one of the things we take very seriously in any journalism course. Now, there are two types of contempt, and I'm happy that the Ogboro is here, you understand. But there are two types of contempt. In strict technical language, one is contempt in facie cura and contempt ex facie cura. Contempt in the face of the court and contempt outside the face of the court. You understand? Contempt in the face of the court is what you do in the court or around the premises of the court in the view of the court itself. And contempt ex facie cura is what you do outside the view of the court. Now, it is important for us to understand that the state of Ghanaian law, if you look at the state of Ghanaian law, what constitutes contempt or does not constitute contempt is determined by the court itself. Okay? So contempt is what the court says is contempt. And as you saw in the previous petition, the court has enormous powers. You can be summoned by the court, virtually prosecuted by the court, and condemned by the court. So that is why it becomes important for all of us to be extremely cautious when discussing matters before the courts. Because the definition of contempt is in the bosom of the court. Now there are some elements which are very critical in the determination of contempt. If you make statements which prejudge the issues before the court, it can amount to contempt. You understand? Make statements that prejudge the issues before the court, usually in criminal trials. If you make statements suggesting that the accused person is already guilty and so on, it can amount to contempt. Then statements or actions which scandalize the court can also amount to contempt. Then statements or actions which actually threaten the security of the court, which threaten the court. So you scandalize the court, you make prejudicial statements, and then you threaten the court. These are the three elements of contempt. You understand? Now, I have been charged with contempt before. And when I started my reporting, the first court that I reported from was the Labadi Magistrate Court. And at that time, one of the most famous judges, of our time, Justice Broby, was sitting in that court. And I went to the court in a t-shirt. That was my crime. I went to the court in a t-shirt and was taking notes as a reporter. And they just looked up and said, "Who is this guy in t-shirt in my court taking notes?" and so on. Many lawyers had to come to my defense and plead with the court to set me free. In fact, if you go to a court and you read a newspaper in the courtroom, reading a newspaper in the courtroom can land you in contempt and so on. So I think it's important that these issues are being raised, and it's important that more technically competent people, deal with these issues. I'm dealing with these issues just from the point of view of a journalist who happen to have focused some attention on the laws of contempt. You understand? Now, right now, the National Democratic Congress and its presidential candidate have gone to court. It is important to recognize that before they did that, there was a cacophony of appeals for them to go to court. Now, have you realized that since the NDC and former President John Dramani Mahama went to court, there's now a new chorus. Why are they in court? That they shouldn't have gone to court. One, because what they are taking to court is empty. There's nothing in it, so they shouldn't have gone to court. And two, that going to court will raise unnecessary tensions and so on. So should they have gone to court or should they not have gone to court? I think that it is important that the National Democratic Congress and former President John Dramani Mahama have gone to court. I do not believe in one moment that going to court brings a certain finality to the issues. It doesn't. First of all, if the matter is not heard by the full bench, the full membership of the Supreme Court, if it doesn't become the panel, it provides an opportunity for asking for a review. So going to court by itself does not bring finality to the issues. So, again, everybody familiar with the law and its practice knows that even when all avenues of appeals have been exhausted, it is still recognized that the judgment is given in the name of the people. The 9, 10, 11 judges who sit on cases in the Supreme Court do so in the name of the people of this country. And that ultimately, after judgment, the people of this country have a right to question that judgment. It's everybody's right. And indeed, if you go back into history, and I'm not going to cite specific cases and so on, there are cases which were determined, which we thought have finality and so on. After many years, new evidence has been adduced to suggest that the judges were wrong. You understand? That the judges were wrong. Now, it is important also simply to recognize that in most cases, especially at the level of the Supreme Court, it is difficult to achieve unanimity. If you look at the last petition, the petition that Akufo-Addo and the New Patriotic Party sent to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court was not unanimous, which shows, again, that judges differ, even on the interpretation of the law. Even on the evaluation of evidence and so on, judges differ, and most often they differ. You understand? That is why, when you move from the High Court to the Court of Appeal, instead of one judge, you have 3. You understand? And then when you move on to the Supreme Court, you have even a larger number of judges to look at the issue. And usually, cases are determined on the basis of the majority. If the majority of judges on the Supreme Court think in a certain direction, interpret the law in a certain way, that becomes what the verdict is. You understand? Now, when you go for review, what happens is that more judges are added on to the number of judges who looked at the case. And if when more judges are added, or the full bench of the court sits, and the case still goes against you, it has gone against you. You understand what I'm saying? Now, in this particular case, what is the National Democratic Congress and President John Dramani Mahama asking the court to do? They are simply saying that the laws governing elections must be looked at, and that the court must make a determination as to whether or not those laws were infringed. And what are these laws governing the elections? There are provisions in the Constitution which tell us how we should organize elections. Did the Electoral Commission follow to the letter the provisions in the Constitution which govern the organization of elections and the declaration of results? That's number one. Then there's the constitutional instrument which also prescribes how this election should be organized, how results should be declared, and so on. The National Democratic Congress and President John Dramani Mahama are asking the Supreme Court to look at the constitutional instrument and to see whether indeed the provisions in this constitutional instrument were adhered to.